you could have 2 to 3 meters sea level rise, or globally, which is a drastic change. It's a little hard to read this chart, but if you look off the coast of North America, the red line that goes off towards Europe is the Gulf Stream. And this is an example of what's called thermohaline circulation, or the oceanic conveyor belt. It's where warm, strong currents at the surface eventually get saltier and colder and start to sink, and their route back is along the ocean floor. If the Greenland ice sheet were to melt, it could dilute the North Atlantic enough to disrupt that flow and maybe either move the Gulf Stream much lower or stop this thermohaline circulation entirely. That's kind of a very perverted scenario that was used in that movie Tomorrow, I can't remember the name of it, where the Earth just freezes, like the North. It's a terrible film, so don't watch it. But it happens like that. It wouldn't happen in a day. It might happen over a number of years. But this scenario would make although you'd have overall global warming, northern Europe would get very cold very fast. Trends in average surface temperature. You can see that over the past 25 years, things have taken a drastic uptick beyond what models had originally predicted. I think the takeaway for climate change is that the time for inaction is long past, and we have to think about a range of options to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions. And the lower the target that can be picked, the less adverse impacts that we have to deal with. And what you're seeing in this CO2 stabilization target chart is the CO2 levels under different control scenarios. More scary stuff at different temperature increase levels over time, what kind of impacts we might expect, and I've covered some of them already. But one of the things we haven't mentioned is loss of biodiversity and extinction of species. When we get past certain temperature levels, we're likely to use whole ecosystems, including coral reefs, could just disappear because corals survive by binding carbon in the form of calcium carbonate, and if the ocean gets too acidic, it can't do that. So that whole community could just disappear. We're already seeing impacts worldwide. None of these sound very good, right? Worth avoiding, certainly not anything we want our kids or grandchildren to have to deal with. The thing that's heartening about this is hopefully we haven't let things go so far that we can't fix them. And there's a lot of things we can do that just make sense in general purposes, even if you weren't trying to fix climate change. Energy efficiency, smarter power grids. We want to get off of using foreign oil for a lot of reasons, including foreign policy. And these things, there's really a no-lose situation for most of these options that involve better use of energy. I mean, nobody likes to sit in traffic if they don't have to, so better mass transit, better alternatives, it all is good. And reforestation. I mean, improving the ecosystems we have right now, they're good for a lot of reasons. Now, it's a possibility that even if we got down to 1990 levels of emissions today, because there's a lag in the way the climate responds, we might have some of these adverse effects anyway. So it may be possible necessary at some point to do some fairly drastic things that hasn't been talked about much that would actually sort of, just as we've interfered with the Earth's system by injecting a lot of these gases, we may have to try some different things to eliminate, to get rid of them that we wouldn't have thought to do. And these are some of the options. Seeding the oceans to increase their uptake of carbon dioxide. It's thought that if you add iron to certain parts of the ocean, that the type of photosynthesis that goes on will drastically change. shoot aerosols into the atmosphere so that it reflects more sunlight back out and warming is lessened. Putting huge reflectors in orbit. I mean, this is science fiction stuff. Genetically engineered crops and pumping CO2 into the bedrock or into the oceans. Now, what's disturbing about this is we kind of gotten to where we are today because we've messed with the globe in a way that we didn't know what was going to happen. So we can't really be sure that any of these things we might do will actually do what we wanted to, or might not do worse things later on. But we may not be able to avoid those kind of thoughts. These are largely global issues that need some consistent approaches across the globe, but really the end where things really improve are local. And these are just a few options of what you can do. You can talk to Janine and buy those light bulbs and actually install them, because a lot of people buy them and put them in their closet. And the good thing about them is they last 10 years?
6 to 10 years.
6 to 10 years. Yeah. Yeah. You can, I believe in New Jersey, you can choose to buy green energy on your utility bill. Is that right? It's true in New York as well. Do all those good things that you know you're supposed to do and we don't always do: reduce, reuse, recycle. Don't drive by yourself, you know. Take a friend to the market. Or better yet, see if you can get some kind of carpooling system here. Over lunch, I was asking if people garden here. Are there anybody in the audience that likes to garden? And you have a greenhouse here? What kind of garden? Is it just is it floral or for food? What you might want to think about is the best way to get really good tasting produce is to grow it yourself. So, well, it's something to think about. I mean, there's a book by Michael Pollan, The Omnivore's Dilemma, that sort of goes through four typical meals that we eat and comparing where they came from and the amount of energy that goes into the different meals. And the main message here, if you can find a way to eat local, either buy from local producers, you often get better food, and there's a lot less energy put into transporting the food. And if fuel prices were to go up drastically, a lot of the food that we buy, like right now, if you go and buy asparagus, it usually comes from Peru or Mexico. Grapes come from Chile often, so that's an awful long haul for fresh fruit. And you know, we can afford that now, but we may not be able to keep that up over time. There's a number of tools online to measure your carbon footprint. You can sort of enter a bunch of questions and it tells you how you're doing as far as what kind of carbon output your lifestyle chooses, and it'll give you tips about what to do. And something you can do as a community, anybody here on the board, or I don't know what your structure is in Concordia, but you might want to think about doing an energy audit, look at the way you're using energy as a community in your common areas, and what kind of practices you might have to lower the carbon footprint of all of Concordia. Be political. Let your elected officials know how you feel about these issues. And vote with your wallet. If there's companies that you don't like the way they're behaving environmentally, don't buy their products. And if you're a stockholder, go to their stock meetings and be a pain in the neck. And this is just what's on the handout. There's a lot of resources out on the web for further study. And before we open to questions, let's ask that question. Who raised your hand? Who knows 3? You're the first one. A huge change from who had been the last administrator under the Bush administration, Stephen Johnson, who sort of on paper had a similar pedigree. He had worked his way up through the ranks of the agency, but in reality, his policies were terrible. And the thing he's most famous for is, this is getting to the fineries of environmental law, but in general, the EPA has allowed states to go beyond federal requirements in protecting the environment. And California had put in a waiver, in conjunction with several other states, had put in a waiver request to be allowed to regulate carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases.